Hey everyone! This story begins the way many silent wars begin, not with a scream, but with a slow, suffocating doubt planted deep inside a young woman's chest. Before the power shifts, before the tables turn, before the crown is claimed, there is always the season of being underestimated. This is a story about patience, precision, and power reclaimed. If stories of quiet strength, delayed justice, and calculated rise speak to you, then this is your moment to show support, to stay connected, and to become part of a community that understands resilience. Welcome to Black Queen Dominion. The foundation of this story rests on a career that never looked impressive to those who valued status over substance. From the outside, the work appeared modest, unglamorous, and easily dismissed. It did not carry the shine of corporate titles or the immediate prestige of visible wealth. Yet beneath that surface lived discipline, foresight, and an understanding of systems most people ignored. The career was built slowly, deliberately, and without applause. It was chosen not for validation but for sustainability and control. The mother, however, measured worth differently. Her worldview revolved around appearances, social rankings, and the kind of success that could be paraded at gatherings. Anything that did not translate into instant admiration was considered failure. The daughter's work became a constant source of disappointment in her eyes, not because it lacked value, but because it did not feed her ego. Subtle remarks turned into habitual belittlement. Comparisons became routine. Achievements were minimized, efforts reframed as wasted potential. Over time, the belittling carved grooves into daily life. Family gatherings felt like performance evaluations. Achievements were met with silence or redirection. The mother's approval became conditional, always just out of reach, always tied to an imaginary standard that kept shifting. The daughter learned early that defending herself only invited more scrutiny. Silence became armor. Focus became refuge. What the mother never understood was that the career she dismissed operated in shadows where leverage was born. It was a field rooted in analysis, long-term contracts, and financial structures that connected quietly to institutions far larger than the family circle. It rewarded those who could wait, who could see patterns years ahead, who could build networks without announcing them. It was not loud, but it was powerful. As years passed, the mother's own financial world began to tighten. The lifestyle she maintained required constant inflow. Investments she once relied on started yielding less. Decisions made for appearance rather than stability came back with consequences. Pride prevented adaptation. Control became her obsession, especially control over the daughter she believed had chosen the wrong path. The belittling intensified as the mother's anxiety grew. It was easier to criticize than to confront her own vulnerability. The daughter's calm presence, her lack of desperation, her steady routine became irritants. There was something unsettling about someone who did not need validation. Something threatening about someone who kept growing without asking permission. Behind the scenes, the daughter's career reached a critical junction. Years of groundwork converged into influence. She began to oversee assets that intersected with funding channels, advisory boards, and financial lifelines that kept entire portfolios alive. Her name did not circulate in gossip, but it appeared where decisions were made. Trust placed in her was not emotional but contractual. It was solid. The irony was almost poetic. The same financial structures that sustained the mother's lifestyle quietly connected to the systems the daughter now managed. Not directly, not obviously, but inevitably. The daughter noticed the connection long before anyone else did. She observed without reacting. She analyzed without revealing. Power, she understood, was most effective when invisible. At home, nothing changed on the surface. The mother continued her commentary. The daughter continued her routine. The imbalance of respect remained, but the balance of power had already begun to shift. The daughter did not rush the moment. Revenge, she believed, was not an explosion. It was a slow unveiling. The daughter stepped fully into a phase of her life where awareness transformed into quiet authority. She no longer viewed the past through the lens of hurt, but through the clarity of cause and effect. Every dismissive comment, every undermining glance, every attempt to reduce her worth now existed as data, not emotion. Her career expanded in scope, drawing her into rooms where decisions rippled outward for years. She handled financial structures that required discretion and foresight. These were not roles given lightly. They demanded precision, emotional control, and an ability to separate personal feelings from professional judgment. She mastered all three. Her reputation grew steadily, built on reliability rather than charm. Meanwhile, the mother's dependence on external validation deepened. The image she maintained grew heavier, more expensive, more fragile. She relied on financial arrangements she barely understood, trusting that the systems she once entered casually would continue to protect her. She did not notice the tightening margins, the subtle warnings, the shifting risk profiles. She assumed stability was permanent. The daughter noticed everything. She saw the patterns in reports, the vulnerabilities in structures, the overextensions masked as confidence. She recognized the lifeline not as a single thread, but as a network of dependencies. And at the center of that network sat the mother's sense of control. It was not money alone that sustained her, but the belief that she could never lose it. At home, the belittling took on a sharper edge. The mother's insecurity leaked into her words, though she would never admit it. The daughter's calm demeanor became a mirror she did not want to face. Every criticism was an attempt to reclaim dominance, to remind herself that she still held authority. Yet authority without leverage is only noise. The daughter made no moves. She continued to fulfill her role with excellence, allowing systems to function exactly as designed. She did not manipulate outcomes. She did not bend rules. She simply understood them better than most. Power in its purest form required no force. Internally, she prepared for the moment when the truth would surface naturally. Financial systems, she knew, always reveal their weakest points eventually. When they do, those who understand the structure decide who rises and who falls. The daughter positioned herself not as an aggressor but as a gatekeeper. The mother's financial pressure increased. Small adjustments became necessary. Assets once considered untouchable were reviewed. Advisors began asking questions. The illusion of endless security cracked, though the mother refused to acknowledge it. Pride kept her blind. She continued to look down on the daughter's career, unaware that it now intersected directly with her survival. The daughter felt no rush of triumph, no hunger for humiliation. What she felt was resolve. Years of belittlement had taught her the cost of underestimating others. She would not repeat that mistake. When the moment came, it would not be about revenge but about balance. The systems the daughter worked within did exactly what they were designed to do. They revealed imbalance. It did not happen overnight, and it did not happen dramatically. It happened through numbers that no longer aligned, projections that required revision, and risk assessments that refused to stay optimistic. What once flowed effortlessly now required justification. The daughter watched this shift with the calm of someone who had anticipated it years ago. She did not cause the instability, nor did she attempt to stop it. She understood a truth few people accepted. Consequences do not need assistance. They only need time. Her role was not to punish, but to decide how the correction would unfold. Her influence had matured into authority. Decisions now passed through her evaluation. Her recommendations shaped outcomes. She had earned a reputation for fairness, not favoritism. That reputation mattered more than power itself. It meant that when she spoke, systems listened. When she paused, processes waited. The mother, on the other hand, felt the change without understanding its source. What unsettled her most was not the financial strain, but the loss of certainty. For the first time, the safety she believed was guaranteed began to feel conditional. Advisors spoke more carefully. Statements carried more footnotes. The ease she once enjoyed was replaced by formality. At home, the dynamic shifted subtly. The mother's criticisms lost their rhythm. They became less frequent, more distracted. Her confidence thinned, though she tried to hide it behind old habits. The daughter noticed the change immediately. Silence, once imposed, now arrived voluntarily. The daughter did not confront her. She did not hint at what she knew. She continued her routine with the same discipline, the same restraint. But internally, she began to prepare for the inevitable crossing point. Financial lifelines, when strained, always lead people back to relationships they assumed were fixed. Dependency has a way of revealing itself when independence fails. As months passed, the mother's situation became undeniable. Liquidity tightened. Obligations approached faster than resources could accommodate. The structures she relied on required restructuring, oversight, and approval. And slowly, quietly, the realization surfaced that the daughter's field of work overlapped with the very mechanisms now determining her future. This realization did not come with humility. It arrived with confusion, then denial. The mother struggled to reconcile the image she held of her daughter with the reality forming around her. How could a career she belittled now sit adjacent to her survival? How could something she dismissed now carry weight she could not ignore? The daughter sensed the approaching shift long before it manifested outwardly. She understood that power transitions are rarely announced. They are felt. She also understood that the moment required restraint. Any premature assertion would weaken her position. True leverage is never displayed. It is discovered. The mother's behavior grew erratic. She oscillated between forced authority and uncharacteristic quiet. She began asking indirect questions, testing boundaries, searching for reassurance without admitting vulnerability. The daughter answered only what was asked, never more. Information she knew was currency. Inside professional spaces, the daughter's role became even clearer. She was now positioned where decisions regarding continuation, adjustment, or withdrawal of financial support were made collectively, but guided by her analysis. Her recommendations carried weight because they were grounded in evidence, not emotion. When the mother's portfolio finally reached that table, it was treated like any other. No special consideration. No personal bias. The irony was complete. The daughter reviewed the structures with the same objectivity she applied to all cases. Yet she could not ignore the significance of the moment. Years of belittlement had led here not as punishment but as consequence. The daughter did not feel satisfaction. What she felt was clarity. The power dynamic that once defined her childhood no longer existed. The imbalance had corrected itself through time, discipline, and patience. The mother's authority had always been assumed. The daughter's had been built. There comes a point where even the most carefully maintained illusions collapse under their own weight, not in chaos but in quiet recognition. For the mother, that moment arrived not through a dramatic loss, but through an undeniable pattern. Doors that once opened effortlessly now required approval. Conversations that once assumed compliance now asked for confirmation. The world no longer bent around her expectations. The mother's sense of control had always been rooted in hierarchy. She believed authority flowed downward naturally from parent to child, from status to silence. That belief had shaped her behavior for decades. She had never considered the possibility that authority could shift, or that respect could be earned rather than inherited. Now, without warning, the structure she trusted began to invert. The daughter remained composed, almost distant, as if watching a long-expected event finally unfold. She did not change her behavior to signal power. She did not seek validation. Her presence alone carried a different weight now, though she made no effort to emphasize it. Confidence, she understood, did not need explanation. The mother's financial situation reached a stage where decisions could no longer be postponed. Continuation depended on review. Stability depended on compliance. The lifeline she once treated as automatic revealed its true nature: conditional, structured, and overseen. And within that oversight, the daughter's influence became impossible to ignore. Recognition arrived slowly, painfully. The mother began to connect fragments she had long dismissed. The daughter's routine. Her calm. Her lack of urgency. Her refusal to engage in arguments. These were not signs of weakness but of certainty. The career she mocked had not only survived, it had matured into authority. This realization triggered a shift in behavior. The mother's tone softened, not out of affection but out of necessity. Her criticisms faded, replaced by cautious neutrality. She began to measure her words, to observe before speaking. For the first time she acknowledged, internally if not aloud, that the balance of power had changed. The daughter noticed the shift, but she did not react. She had long learned that true acknowledgement does not require confrontation. It reveals itself through restraint. The absence of belittlement spoke louder than any apology. Silence, once weaponized against her, now served as proof of her rise. Professionally, the daughter handled the situation with precision. She adhered strictly to policy, process, and fairness. No favoritism. No retaliation. The mother's case was evaluated as one among many, though its emotional weight was unique. The daughter understood that power misused would only replicate the dynamics she had endured. She refused to become what once oppressed her. Internally, she reflected on the journey that led here. The years of being underestimated had sharpened her focus. The lack of support had taught her self-reliance. The belittlement had forced her to build value quietly, beyond perception. What once felt like injustice now revealed itself as training. The mother's internal struggle intensified. She grappled with regret, though she could not yet name it. The image she held of herself as superior clashed with the reality of dependence. It was not the financial strain that unsettled her most, but the realization that the daughter she had diminished now held influence over her future. Yet even now the daughter did not seek acknowledgement. She did not demand recognition. Power, she knew, was most complete when it did not require validation from those who once denied it. Her sense of worth no longer depended on her mother's approval. By the time acceptance arrived, it did so without ceremony. The mother no longer fought the reality before her because there was nothing left to resist. The financial structures that once upheld her sense of superiority now demanded humility, discipline, and accountability. The illusion of permanent control dissolved completely, replaced by a system that responded only to logic and leadership. The daughter stood fully within her role, grounded and unshaken. She had crossed the threshold from survival into sovereignty long before this moment, but now the world around her reflected that truth. She no longer carried the weight of being misunderstood. She no longer felt the need to explain her choices. Her career had spoken for her, steadily and undeniably. The mother's behavior transformed, not dramatically but definitively. The belittlement ended. The comparisons disappeared. In their place emerged a careful distance, marked by restraint and unspoken acknowledgement. It was not an apology, but it was recognition. For someone who had built her identity on dominance, this shift was monumental. The daughter did not seek reconciliation on terms that required erasing the past. She understood that healing did not mean forgetting. It meant refusing to carry what no longer served her. She maintained professionalism, fairness, and emotional boundaries. Her strength was no longer reactive. It was rooted. In managing the financial lifeline, the daughter upheld every principle she had committed to from the beginning. Transparency, accountability, sustainability. The outcome was neither punishment nor rescue. It was balance. The mother's future stabilized not through favoritism but through structure. Through the same systems she once dismissed as insignificant. What made the victory profound was its quietness. There was no confrontation, no dramatic reveal, no declaration of power. The shift spoke for itself. The daughter did not need to say she had risen. Everyone involved could see it. Internally, the daughter reflected on what the journey had cost and what it had given her. She had learned that being underestimated was not a curse but an advantage. It allowed her to grow without interference. It taught her patience. It forced her to build depth rather than display. The very dismissal meant to weaken her had refined her. The mother, in her silence, faced a reckoning of her own. She began to understand that authority imposed without respect eventually collapses. That control built on belittlement erodes trust. That power rooted in ego is temporary. Though she may never voice these realizations, they shaped her actions going forward. The relationship between them settled into a new form. Not warm, not hostile, but real. The hierarchy that once defined it no longer existed. What remained was an understanding shaped by consequence. The daughter did not need approval. The mother no longer assumed dominance. As the story closes, the crown is not placed on the daughter's head by applause or recognition. It rests there because she earned it. Through restraint. Through discipline. Through silence. She became powerful not by taking but by becoming. This is the essence of Black Queen dominion. Power does not always roar. Sometimes it waits. And when it rises, it does so without asking permission.